Okay, so I've got to say, and this kind of goes for the business broadly, if they're not willing to pay for it, don't bark up that tree. If you're not providing a service for them or a product for them that they're willing to pay for, it's not going to work. And I think, sometimes we ignore that advice. Whenever we ignore that advice, it doesn't work.
Welcome to the Product Market Fit Show, brought to you by Mistral, a seed stage firm based in Canada. I'm Pablo. I'm a founder turned VC. My goal is to help early stage founders like you find product market fit. The topic of today's episode is how to use partnerships to bootstrap your startup. To dive into this topic, we've got Laura, the founder and CEO of Diversio, a platform that measures, tracks, and helps companies improve diversity and inclusion. Diversio is based in Toronto and New York. They have about 40 employees and have raised just shy of $10 million. Laura, it's great to have you here today.
Hey, Pablo. Great to be here.
You just raised this pretty big round, but before that, you were able to grow your company to like mid 7-figure ARR in 3 years with no funding. And as I understand it, a big reason of how you were able to do this was by using partnerships to do more with less. So we'll dive into all this, but maybe just to kind of like set some context, could you take us back to when you had the idea, and without going too deep into the entire origin story, just where were you at the time? What were you doing? Kind of how did this come to you?
Yeah, so the backstory, and it's funny, it's like talking about your family, but the backstory on Diversio is I started my career in consulting. So I worked at McKinsey and Company for several years, leading work in the economic growth and the diversity and inclusion space. And what we kept hearing from CEOs over and over is that luckily we're at a time where the business case for diversity is, well understood. There really could not be more data that diverse companies outperform, inclusive companies are better off. But CEOs don't know how to do it. So when it comes to quantifying, measuring, tracking things like inclusion, there's just a whole lot of blank stares, misunderstanding, lack of clarity, and certainly lack of knowledge on what to do to solve the problem. And so we kept hearing, I feel like I'm throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping that whatever program works. And so the vision, and this, feels kind of simple to look back on, but the vision was, could we create a software platform that helps companies quantify and improve diversity, but in particular that inclusion piece, so experience, and then use artificial intelligence to recommend solutions. So it's all about getting to the right answer, implementing those bite-sized interventions that will make a more inclusive workplace.
Perfect. And so, you have this idea, you're not a developer, you can't start building, even if, not sure that that's necessarily the right step, but you couldn't do it even if you thought it was the right step. So what is kind of your first move? And are you working full time at this point? Do you leave the company you're at? What's the context?
Yeah, so the context. So you're right. I am not a developer, and there was no way that I was going to figure out how to code in time to get this thing to work. So what happened basically, with the encouragement of a close advisor, quit McKinsey. The next day called a few friends and said, look, I want to start this business. Here's the idea. Do you think I could raise capital? And got really a hard no from everyone I spoke to. This is not scalable. It's not venture backable. It's really just a consulting company that might have some technology angle, but we can't, not something that we could invest in. And so with that in mind, you pivot and you say, okay, well, what resources do I have, or what could I pull together? And one thing that I'm good at, and I think the company's become good at, is forming those win-win partnerships where you get the assets or the resources that you need, and then you have to figure out, well, how do I provide value back to that partner? And so kind of two things that you need when you're starting a company, product and customers. Reached out originally to the head of YPO Canada, who's, and still is a good friend, and said, look, I have this idea. I think that the G7 is coming up. What if we got together a group of companies, had them all take the same survey, collect some data on diversity and inclusion, create a benchmark? And there's this product vision. It's not in the market yet, but I think that this could be a really great set of early adopters to really kind of validate. And he was excited. He said, that sounds like a great idea. I think we could pull some people together. So he went out and hit the pavement. And obviously with my support, went out and found about 25 companies who said, look, we'll pitch in a little bit of money, and in return, we'll get, a consultative report. And most importantly, we'll get data. And sure, we'll sign up.
How did you know, YPO came to you, and that's the partnership that worked. Did you have 10 other partnerships you were trying out at the time, or one of one? Like, how did you pick them?
Yeah, you know what it was? I went around basically anyone who would pick up the phone who I knew was kind of influential or, a good connector and said, here's what I want to do. Let's brainstorm. And that's when a lot of people said, want nothing to do with this. It's not going to be a real thing. And then other people said, I know the head of Women in Capital Markets, or I know the head of the Institutional Limited Partner Association, and this one happened to hit.
Perfect. So this one worked, and that got you what? Did it get you early sales, but more kind of on a consulting project? Is that right?
It got me our first sale. It was actually sponsored by YPO. And the output that they expected was a little bit different than what we had available at the moment. So the idea that we sold to them was, ultimately this will become some sort of dashboard, but we need the data to, get the foundation of what the dashboard looks like. So that kind of, nailed that in. And we reached out to the G7 Women's Forum, which was being hosted in Toronto. And we said, look, we've partnered with this really cool organization, YPO. We've got 25 companies who have raised their hand. What if we do a presentation, really a product launch at the G7? And then they got excited because we had this brand behind us and they said, absolutely, let's do it. Here's your spot. And then really kind of panic mode because we needed a product. And so went to the University of Toronto, to the MBA program and said, hey, do you have any kind of smart students who are looking for an internship or looking for something to get their hands dirty in? Rotman said, yeah, we actually have this great course where students get credit if they work on a real business problem. And they love it because, they get practical experience. And so here's 5 people who are kind of ready, available, and willing to help and build this thing.
And these are business students, not developers?
So we land and expand. So we started with the business school and got some data analysts. And then we went into the engineering school and said, hey, we've got this great partnership with Rotman. We would love to work with your engineering program, got a professor fired up, and then we ended up with a team of engineers as well.
And did you try to also was it just you as a founder? Did you try to also get a technical co-founder, somebody full-time? It's one thing to have interns, business interns that you can, that world, but it's a little harder when they're, technical people. How did you manage that?
So I would say, Pablo, getting a technical co-founder was the smartest thing that I never did. And it ended up being the best decision that I made. So my co-founder, I actually pulled from RBC. Her name is Anya. She is my absolute right-hand woman. And her background was academia, data analytics. She had a product focus at RBC, but really was more just a super smart, resourceful, crafty person. And so the two of us together, while neither of us could code, both of us are extremely resourceful. And so how we made it work is we got that small contract from YPO. We got a bunch of resources for free. Every dollar that we got in sales, we used to hire engineers. So we hired our first engineer, Sahil, who's actually still with us. And he really, very talented. We couldn't, go with anyone other than the best of the best. So we had to get him motivated, inspired by the vision, which he was. And that's really where we started to build out this actual dashboard solution.
Most people that don't have a technical co-founder would say that getting one is the smartest thing to do. You're saying it's the smartest thing you never did. Why is that?
Yeah, in my mind, and I think I may be an outlier in this regard, but to run a tech company, really coding is a very small part of what you're doing. And it is in some ways a commodity. So in the same way that you're never going to start with every function of the business that you ultimately scale, you just have to work with what you have and then you outsource the rest or you bring in the rest. So for me, looking back, having someone like Anya, who's very talented, incredibly good at sales, incredibly, attuned to the market, knows our clients inside and out, with something that's very hard to hire and replicate. Whereas engineering talent is something that we could kind of grow as we went. And we did find that our mission was landing in that community. So we ended up getting some talented people who, quite frankly, were willing to take a pay cut until we could afford to pay the market rate.
Did having less builders in your DNA force you to focus more on selling and customer related activities, you think?
100%. I think one mistake I think a lot of companies make is not bootstrapping for longer. It forces you to be very focused on the problem you're solving. It forces you to work with clients, understand what they're willing to pay for, and bake in that commercial mindset, which I actually think in a space like ours is extremely important because it does attract really mission-driven people. And so having that discipline that at the end of the day, you're still a commercial enterprise is something that I think bootstrapping helped us to instill.
And how do you attract talent when you're bootstrapped, especially in this environment? There's talent wars, people are paying crazy amounts. How did you make that happen?
Yeah, again, I think bootstrapping is a forcing device. Like when you don't have resources, you have to get incredibly sharp and crisp on what is your mission? What is your value prop as an organization beyond money that's going to attract talent? And that getting crisp on that mission statement, I mean, you can use that in sales then. You can use that in marketing. So you really have to be able to go out there and say, like, look, you're working on a problem that's bigger than your average startup. And here's how we differentiate. And here's how we're going to create a really unbelievable culture where you feel like you're developing and growing and really having an impact.
Perfect. So back to the partnerships, you did the YPO partnership, you had the partnership with the university. What was the next meaningful partnership after that?
Yeah, so we ended up, it's funny, we now have an entire segment of our business, which is working with industry associations. So we went to the Human Resources Professional Association, for example. We struck a big partnership with them where we analyzed diversity and inclusion across the HR industry, created a benchmark, provided a discount to them and their members, which has now generated new product lines, a certification program. And so that was paid to begin with. We did something similar with Diversity VC, which is a UK-based industry body in the VC industry. We created a certification program and a dashboard for their VC partners, which has now been incredibly successful, I think. And again, it was paid, so they supported the development of this dashboard. And so through them, we ended up getting clients like Bessemer, like 500 Startups, like M12, like Amex Ventures, like Shell Ventures. And again, everything we did was funded by sales.
One of the big topics here around partnerships is that probably the more common perspective is that early on, you're much better off focusing on direct efforts, things that you can control, right? And these partnerships, especially the ones with the really big, like a partner with Microsoft or something like that, right? Where you think that it's going to save your company, it's going to lead to so much sales. And the reality is you have to manage it. It's a lot harder than you think. And really early on, there's kind of no demand for your product. And the kind of cliche is you got to go generate your own demand and then partners will come. You seem to have flipped that. What's your thinking on just that idea that partnerships are something more useful later in the life of a company? Is there something about Diversio itself that made you guys very suited to partnerships, or is it something that many startup founders could leverage much earlier than they think?
I mean, it's really great advice. I think if you're bootstrapping, you don't have the luxury of trying to partner with Microsoft, frankly. We've explored a few partnerships like that, and you're like, okay, it's like a 1.5 year long sales cycle. So unless you're going to make no money for 1.5 years, when you're bootstrapping, that's not an option. So for us, like the type of partner and the outcome was really important. So for us, we had sales partnerships and we had development partnerships. So on the development side, like the R&D, we've now worked with 4 or 5 academic institutions. And for us, like the litmus test was like, have they done this before? How do they feel about IP? Who are the academics that we're working with? Are they scrappy? Are they entrepreneurial? And if they checked all 3 boxes, we'd work with them. So a good example is we went from the University of Toronto. We then partnered with the Turing Institute in the UK. We partnered with Dalhousie. We partnered with the University of Waterloo. And we found that just entrepreneurial people who like really wanted to get their hands dirty. So that was great.
And those partnerships with the universities, what's the thinking there? Is it just strictly a way to get talent for less, or is there something else going on that's driving you to have, a lot of partnerships? What's the thinking there?
Yeah, so we work with, look, I think there's a healthy dose of humility that we bring to this business, which is like lots of enterprising academics are doing really important work that we need to be aware of. So with Dalhousie, for example, the academics we worked with who, have been fantastic, had some really great natural language processing technology that they had built that analyzes employee feedback, free text. And our thought and our conversation with them was like, look, we think we use surveys. Survey fatigue is a big problem. How do we allow employees to speak in their own voice, in their own words really quickly and generate insights from that? And they said, wow, great academic problem in a really cool, meaningful space. Let's develop an algorithm. So we need your expertise as diversity and inclusion experts. And we've got the engineering ML experts. Let's work together, build an algorithm and from their perspective, write a paper. And so we agreed, like, look, absolutely, let's anonymize and share back the data so that you can generate insights, get published. And in return, we've now got this proprietary algorithm that is adding a ton of value for our clients.
Is there something beyond the end product they get? Like, is there some sort of credibility stamp that you get by doing that? Because just to play devil's advocate, the flip side would be find a way to raise money and just, hire those people, maybe not the professor, but like as many people close to that in-house. And then you don't have to worry about getting a paper done. You don't have to worry about finding win-win outcomes and all these sort of things.
Yeah, I mean, that's another way to do it. I think it goes to the heart of how do you innovate. And I think for us, like, we have an engineering team in-house and we develop specs and we go to market and all of that's great and it works and it builds the foundation. One thing that we really like though is, like, with the Turing Institute, like we never would have built the kind of technology that they had spent 3 years building, which is a plugin that sits on Slack and GitHub and identifies bias in real time. We, like, just frankly wouldn't have built that spec, and we wouldn't have. But by kind of constantly being on the lookout, we were able to be connected with them. And now we've got this muscle developed where we know how to partner with universities. We know how to make it a win-win. And to your point, Pablo, one thing that was a learning for us is, like, what are academics after? And they're after data and publications. Like, really, that's it. That's enough. And so we built that into our customer contracts early on, that, like, look, we're going to anonymize all of your data, but we are absolutely going to share it with academic institutions so we can move everybody forward. So I think you have to build the muscle. You have to build your company to allow for that if you think that there's value there.
Let's talk maybe a bit more about the partnerships on the sales side. Maybe a high level question. How do you choose those, right? How do you know? Because there's just so many entities you could partner with, and some of them are like too big. It's going to take too long. Some are too small and they're not really going to help you out. Maybe you're not going to be able to help them out. How are you really picking that perfect partner each time? What do you think through?
Okay, so I've got to say, and this kind of goes for the business broadly, if they're not willing to pay for it, don't bark up that tree. If you're not providing a service for them or a product for them that they're willing to pay for, it's not going to work. And I think, sometimes we ignore that advice. Whenever we ignore that advice, it doesn't work.
And to be clear, pay for it, that means these are not like reseller partnerships where they're like, I'll just resell your thing and, I'll give you a kickback, or I get a kickback each time. They're actually paying to get your product.
So for us, how it's both, but for us, how it typically works and where we succeed is you have often like an industry body or some sort of convening association who wants a benchmark. That's what we do well. We collect data, we create insights, we recommend solutions. So industry bodies are often in the market for that, because they're like, look, we need to be a thought leader for the energy sector. We need to be a thought leader for the limited partner sector. But we don't have the capacity, we don't have the know-how to collect this data ourselves. So let's work with Diversio. We're going to pay you for that sector benchmark. But also in the process, we now know you and we know that our members have a demand here. So we're going to recommend you. So let's figure out a process where, if it's a discount, if it's a bit of a rev share, how do we create that benchmark, generate the credibility, and then have you go to market with our members? So
beyond just, are they willing to pay? What else are you looking at to pick who you partner with? What order, like how do you prioritize who you could partner with? And then the other side of that is, how do you make the partnerships successful once they're in place?
Yeah. So on the first one, so this is going to sound odd coming from a former strategy consultant, we don't overthink it. So you want to go with someone with enough footprint and enough access and trust. But I think most importantly, and you kind of know it when you see it, like, who is the person in charge of partnerships at that organization, and do they get shit done? Like, that's the most important thing. Like, are we going to have to push it forward 100%? Or do we have people who are like, I have this acute need and my members are asking me about this a lot and I want to make this happen?
And then on the flip side of that, once you do have this partnership in place, how much, if anything, are you doing to make the partnerships actually successful?
So I would say it really depends. I think as a rule, always overestimate your own participation. I would say that kind of is true in almost any partnership, including personal. Like, always assume you're going to have to do more work than the other person. And if you want to get it done, especially if you're an entrepreneur, like, you have to push it forward. So everything from, we've developed marketing content for our partners. We've developed emails. We've literally designed websites and web and landing pages. We've created LinkedIn content, social media content. So you want to be really thoughtful about like, how do I take this to market? And sometimes, and this has happened, you land on a partner who like does it better than you do. And they come to you and say, hey, we want to roll out certification, like in the case of Diversity VC. And we've set up a team in the US because we want to expand in Silicon Valley. So I would say be prepared to do more. And again, if you're filtering for people, you'll be surprised when they end up kind of driving the bus.
Were there any partnerships that really like that you remember really kind of taking the company to the next level? I'm kind of wondering, is this just partnership after partnership after partnership? At some point you have 50 of them and therefore, you know, your revenue's at a certain point? Or did you kind of have these step functions where every now and then there was just a major partnership that really took the company to the next level?
So I would say our partnerships in the investment space have been game changing. So I would say the partnership with Diversity VC that I mentioned, the certification program, we started out with, I think, 12 investors, all based in the UK. So your Balderton, Atomico, Anthemis, and then worked really well, great feedback. We, with our partners, said, let's expand to the US. We got, Bessemer involved, we got M12, and we got covered.
And to be clear, this partnership is VCs kind of asking their portfolio startups to submit D&I data?
So this one started with VCs themselves. So once we kind of collect the data, we determine if they qualify to get certified. If they do, great, they get certified, they post about it, et cetera. When we brought it to the US, we did it with our partners. We said, let's relaunch, let's replicate what we did in the UK. Let's get some early adopters. We did that together. We made the announcement. We got some unbelievable press coverage. We were in the front page of PitchBook for like a week straight. And that ended up generating a ton of leads, which created a ton of client relationships. So I would say that was game changing. I think the other somewhat similar relationship we have is with the Investor Leadership Network, where we're working with them to set the standard among LPs. And by working with them, we have access to their 15 members, a ton of credibility in the LP space. We frankly know what we're talking about. So I think that's been another game changer.
When did you really feel like you had product market fit? And what were some of the signs that you started seeing that said, this is kind of beyond an experiment, this thing's working, it's providing real value, and there's something big to be built here?
That's a good question. I'm going to say, I don't know if I ever am going to feel like I have perfect product market fit. But I think the signs started to occur. Like, we built our business model. It's SaaS. It's recurring revenue. You sign an annual contract with, automatic renewal. I mean, sign number one is like, I think we've had one cancellation ever out of like 170 clients. So like our clients like see the value and they want to keep using the product. So I think that's signal number one. I think signal number two is, and we're in a funny space. I don't know if everyone thinks this, but we're in a space where almost like most people change the product to fit the market. And we came to life at a time where really the market changed in a lot of ways to fit the product. So after COVID, when Black Lives Matter kind of generated a lot of activity, the market started saying, okay, this whole like diversity data thing, like, yeah, we need it. And like, do we need data-driven plans so we can track over time? Like, we had the product in the market. And so with those tailwinds, we saw more and more people coming to us and being referred to us, and then kind of immediately saying, I get the value. And I think those were some of the signals.
Well, maybe on that, just because timing is, from our side, I mean, it's one of the most important things we think about when investing in a company, maybe aside the team and the idea is the timing right. You got the timing right. Do you have any advice on getting the timing right, on how you think through that? I think there's pieces that are outside your control, like these tailwinds that maybe came after, but D&I was already growing. So do you have any advice for founders on how to figure out whether the timing is right for their idea?
Like, I'll go back to like Bootstrap. Like, it's easy to, if you can't survive through without making sales, like that'll give you a really good indication on whether the market is ready. Obviously it doesn't work if you're building, medical technology or a lot of clean tech solutions, but in something like software, B2B sales, like you'll know quickly if you're struggling and you're like on the edge of your seat and you're worried about making any sort of payroll, then you want to think through, is this the right time for this product?
Maybe on that question, because you started out at least exploring the idea of raising money, and then when you couldn't, you decided to bootstrap and it worked out. Do you think, going back to that, like if you had raised money, if that would have been successful, if that maybe would have done more harm than good?
Maybe I'll put it a different way. I don't know how much we would have done differently. I think that we might have spent, I think we would have been much less capital efficient. And I think we would be much less disciplined. I'm even now feeling, now that we've raised, like it's easy to feel like we've got money. Let's just, every tool, every opportunity, let's go after it. And I'm finding myself consciously saying like, let's keep that discipline because that's the business that we're building. And so I think that's harder to maintain if you're well funded from the beginning.
Perfect. All right, Laura, we'll wrap it up there. Maybe just to recap, you had this idea about building a benchmark for diversity and inclusion, and you couldn't build it. You decided to use partnerships to not just build it, but really to kind of first sell it and then build it and then sell it more and then keep building it and bootstrap your way to where you are today, which is, 40, 50 employees, a big round under your belt, and more importantly, hundreds of really, really happy customers. And it's only the beginning. So thanks a lot for sharing all of that with us. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks, Pablo. Likewise.
Thank you so much for listening all the way through. It's been a pleasure having you here. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.